Max Planck was a German theoretical physicist and the winner of the 1918 Nobel Prize in Physics. He made many contributions to the field of theoretical physics, but he's perhaps most well known for his quantum hypothesis. He's generally known as the father of quantum physics. Gerard Kuiper was a Dutch-born astronomer and planetary scientist. In fact, he made so many contributions to our understanding of the formation of the solar system that many consider him to be the father of modern planetary science. But despite their great accomplishments, there's no reason that these two men really should have met. They came from different generations, different countries, and rose to be giants in different areas of the study of physics. And yet we know that they did meet, so far as we know, just one time, in May 1945. It is history that deserves to be remembered. In the fall of 1943, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff, General George C. Marshall, suggested the creation of a secret intelligence operation under the auspices of the Manhattan Engineer District, which was essentially the Army component of the Manhattan Project. The purpose of the program would be to send Allied scientists to interview scientists in occupied Italy to better understand Germany's progress on nuclear weapons. Marshall's memo stated, "The scope of inquiry should cover all principal scientific military developments, and the investigation should be conducted in a manner to gain knowledge of enemy progress without disclosing our interests in any particular field." The mission was intended to be kept secret. The Allies were afraid that if the Axis figured out that the Allies were interested in nuclear weapons, that would spur the Axis to accelerate their own programs. To maintain secrecy, the very small project was staffed entirely by the Office of Naval Intelligence, Army Intelligence, the Office of Scientific Research and Development, and scientists of the Manhattan Project. The whole project was under the auspices of Brigadier General Leslie Groves, who was the U.S. Army engineer who was in overall charge of the Manhattan Project. The project was given the name ALSOS, apparently suggested by the scientists. Groves only became aware of the genesis of the name later. ALSOS is Greek for Grove. The general was not impressed by the scientists' humor. Codenames were intended to be obtuse in order to hide their intent, and nothing was more secret than the Manhattan Project. But he decided it would draw even more attention to change the project name. While the original mission was in Italy, the mission would eventually extend to France and Germany. The idea was to send qualified scientists with the military advancing through Europe and task them with learning how close Germany was to developing its own atomic weapon. In January 1945, Gerard Kuiper joined the team. Kuiper had been born in the Netherlands in 1905, the son of a tailor. He had extraordinary eyesight as a youth, a trait that led him into the field of astronomy. He studied at Leiden University in the Netherlands and earned his doctorate in 1933, doing a doctoral thesis on binary stars. While pursuing his degree, he had corresponded with American astronomer Robert Grant Aiken at the University of California. After obtaining his doctorate, Kuiper moved to the United States to become a fellow at the university's Lick Observatory near San Jose. He married an American, became an American citizen in 1937. In 1943, Kuiper was working at the University of Chicago, and he took a leave of absence to go work for the Harvard Radio Research Laboratory to help develop countermeasures for radar. That work took him to London, and there Kuiper, who had grown up in the Netherlands and spoke fluent German, joined ALSOS. The great surprise of the ALSOS project was that the Germans were not very far along at all in their bomb development. By the time that Kuiper joined the project, it was less focused on trying to gain German technology or thwart their bomb development and more about collecting up German nuclear scientists before the Russians could get their hands on them. Their search continued even after Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8th, a chaotic time. On May 16th, 1945, the search found an unexpected subject. Dr. Richard Pohl, a physicist at the University of Göttingen, had an idea about the location of one of Germany's most renowned physicists, Max Planck. Max Planck was born in northern Germany in 1858, the son of a law professor. He came from a family of intellectuals. A brilliant man, he was a gifted musician and composer, but chose not to make it his career. Instead, he chose to study physics. One of his professors tried to steer him away from the field, telling that in the field of physics, almost everything had already been discovered. But he persisted. Planck earned his doctorate by the age of 22. In 1900, while a professor at what was then called Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin, Planck offered an answer to explain a question about so-called black body radiation. His answer, eventually called Planck's law and its derivatives, Planck's postulate and Planck's constant, were able to deduce the relationship between energy and the frequency of radiation, the basis of quantum physics. The work, proposed in 1900 and published in 1901, was, in the words of physicist Max Born, the most revolutionary idea which has ever shaken physics. That idea was published by Max Planck 4 years before Gerard Kuiper was even born. By the 1920s, Planck was considered one of the most important scientists in the world and the highest authority of German physics. He was Dean of Berlin University and a leading member of the Prussian Academy of Sciences, the German Physical Society, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Society for the Advancement of Science. He retired from the University of Berlin in 1926. When the Nazis rose to power in Germany in 1933, Planck was 74 years old. He was unwilling to take a direct stand against the Nazis. When another physicist asked him to gather scientists to take a public stand against the treatment of Jewish professors, he responded, "If you are able to gather today 30 such gentlemen, then tomorrow 150 others will come and speak against it, because they are eager to take over the positions of the others." While he tried to keep the Kaiser Wilhelm Society from open conflict with the Nazis, he tried to speak on behalf of a member, Fritz Haber, winner of the 1918 Nobel Prize for Chemistry, to the new Chancellor, Adolf Hitler. While Haber had served in the Ministry of War during the Great War and had converted to Christianity, he had been born Jewish, and Hitler didn't trust him. Planck's support for Haber put the aging scientist on the wrong side of the Nazis, and he was eventually forced to leave his positions within the German physics societies, which lost their own independence and were taken over by the government. He was criticized for continuing to support the works of Albert Einstein. Nazi critics called him a white Jew. The Nazi Office for Science declared that they were investigating his ancestry and declared him 1/16 Jewish. Max Planck might have been able to escape the country, but he thought that it was his duty to stay in Germany. Disaster came for Max Planck's family in 1944. His youngest son, Erwin, was implicated in the July 20th plot to kill Hitler. Erwin was convicted by Hitler's so-called People's Court and sentenced to death in October. Max Planck had tried to use all his remaining connections as one of the most famous scientists in German history to save his son, but to no avail. Erwin was executed by hanging on January 23rd, 1945. By then, Max was already hiding in the country. His home in Berlin had been destroyed in air raids in 1944. They had fled to a country home near Rogatz, but the town had become the front lines in April, and the Plancks had fled. Historian J.J. Heilbronn noted that Planck and his wife Marga often hid in the woods and slept in haystacks. The 87-year-old suffered from arthritis in his spine, where a vertebra had fused. His niece would later say that he often screamed from the pain. He and Marga were hiding at a dairy farm east of the Elbe River when Pohl reported the rumor of his location to Gerard Kuiper. The news of the location of the eminent physicist was not promising. The American advance had been stopped at the Elbe. Max Planck, on the other side of the river, was in the Soviet zone, and the Soviet army was advancing. The Soviets were taking a brutal revenge on Germany. A May 2015 issue of Scientific American noted, the survival rate of Germans captured by the Red Army hovered around 50%. Moreover, the countryside was full of desperate German soldiers and refugees. And Max Planck was of no interest to Alsos. He'd never been part of the German nuclear program. It was frankly not Gerard Kuiper's job to go beyond the American lines and risk his life running around in the lawless Soviet zone trying to chase after a geriatric retired physicist. But Max Planck was a legend, and Kuiper decided to act. In his book Planck, Driven by Vision, Broken by War, Brandon R. Brown, a professor of physics and astronomy at the University of San Francisco, said that the 40-year-old Kuiper fancied himself a daring fellow. He sought the permission of the scientific head of Alsos, physicist Samuel Goldschmidt, and, according to Brown, grabbed two soldiers, leapt in a jeep, and bounded across the post-apocalyptic landscape towards Rogatz. In the end, the daring rescue of Max Planck was not the adventure that it could have been. It turned out that the information that had been given to Kuiper was accurate. They were able to find Max and Margot, collect them up, and race away ahead of the Red Army. But the jeep ride was excruciating for the arthritic Max Planck, and he spent 5 weeks in a hospital before he could walk again. The Plancks were essentially penniless. All of their possessions had been lost. Even his scientific papers had been destroyed in the bombing, but they were able to live with a niece in Göttingen. Max Planck passed away in October 1947 at the age of 89. One of the burning questions for Alsos was what to do with the captured German scientists. In the end, they decided on a policy of intern and monitor. Their accommodations were thoroughly bugged to listen into their conversations. The conclusion was that Germany was never close to an atomic weapon. When America dropped atomic bombs on Japan in August 1945, Leslie Groves later said that the Germans struggled to comprehend how the Allies had done what they could not. Gerard Kuiper went back to the University of Chicago and eventually founded the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory at the University of Arizona. He made many contributions to planetary science, infrared astronomy, and our understanding of the foundations of the solar system, including discovering Uranus's satellite Miranda and Neptune's satellite Nereid. He helped to identify landing spots for the Apollo program. Gerard Kuiper died of a heart attack in 1973. That this one eminent scientist risked his life in time of war to rescue another eminent scientist just because he thought he should represents perhaps the best in humanity. Certainly it is history that deserves to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history between 10 and 15 minutes long. And if you did enjoy, please go ahead and click that thumbs up button. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, please write those in the comment section. I will be happy to personally respond. Be sure to follow The History Guy on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and check out our merchandise on teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes on forgotten history, all you need to do is subscribe.